The Dark Hour. A short story by Wilbur Daniel Steele. The returning ship swam swiftly through the dark, the deep interior breathing of the engines, the singing of wire stays, the huge whispering rush of foam streaming the waterline made up a body of silence upon which the sound of the doctor's footfalls coming and going restlessly along the near deck intruded only a little, a faint and personal disturbance. Charging slowly through the dark, a dozen paces forward, a dozen paces aft, his invisible and tormented face bent forward a little over his breast, he said to himself, "What fools! What blind fools we've been!" Sweat stood for an instant on his brow, and was gone in the steady onrush of the wind. The man lying on the cot in the shelter of the cabin companionway made no sound all the while. He might have been asleep or dead, he remained so quiet. Yet he was neither asleep nor dead, for his eyes, large, wasted, and luminous, gazed out unwinking from the little darkness of his shelter into the vaster darkness of the night, where a star burned in slow mutations, now high, now sailing low over the rail of the ship. Once he said in a washed and strengthless voice, "That's a bright star, Doctor." If the other heard, he gave no sign. He continued charging slowly back and forth, his large, dim shoulders hunched over his neck, his hands locked behind him, his teeth showing faintly grey between the fleshy lips, which hung open a little to his breathing. "It's dark," he said of a sudden, bringing up before the cot in the companionway. "God, Hallett, how dark it is!" There was something incoherent and mutilated about it, as if the cry had torn the tissues of his throat. "I'm not myself tonight," he added, with a trace of shame. Hallett spoke slowly from his pillow. "It wouldn't be the subs tonight. You're not that kind, you know. I've seen you in the zone, and we're well west of them by this anyhow, and as you say, it's very dark." "It's not that darkness. Not that." Again, there was the same sense of something tearing. The doctor rocked for a moment on his thick legs. He began to talk. "It's this war," his conscience protested. "I ought not to go on so. It's not right at all. Talking so to the wounded, the dying. I shouldn't go on so to the dying." And all the while, the words continued to tumble out of his mouth. "No, I'm not a coward. Not especially. You know I'm not a coward, Hallett. You know that. But just now, tonight, somehow, the whole black truth of the thing has come out and got me. Jumped out of the dark and got me by the neck, Hallett. Look here, I've kept a stiff lip. Since the first I've said, we'll win this war. It's been a matter of course. So far as I know, never a hint of doubt has shadowed my mind, even when things went bad. In the end, I've said, in the end, of course, we're bound to win." He broke away again to charge slowly through the dark with his head down, butting. A large, overheated animal endowed with a mind. "But do we want to win?" Hallett's question, very faint across the subdued breathings and showerings of the ship, fetched the doctor up. He stood for a moment, rocking on his legs and staring at the face of the questioner, still and faintly luminous on the invisible cot. Then he laughed briefly, shook himself, and ignored the preposterous words. He recollected tardily that the fellow was pretty well gone. "No," he went on, "up to tonight I've never doubted. No one in the world, in our part of the world, has doubted. The proposition was absurd to begin with. Prussia and her fringe of hangers-on, to stand against the world, to stand against the very drift and destiny of civilization? Impossible. A man can't do the impossible. That's logic, Hallett, and that's common sense. They might have their day of it, their little hour, because they had the jump, but in the end. But look at them, will you? Look at them. That's what's got me tonight, Hallett. Look at them. There they stand. They won't play the game, won't abide at all by the rules of logic of common sense. Every day, every hour, they perform the impossible. Not once since the war was a year old have they been able to hang out another 6 months. They'd be wiped from the earth. Their people would starve. They're wiped from the earth, and they remain. They starve and lay down their skinny bodies on the ground, and they stand up again with sleek bellies. They make preposterous, blind boasts. They say, "We'll overrun Romania in a month." Fantastic, it's done. They say, "Russia? Newborn Russia? Strong young boy Russia? We'll put him out of it for good and all by Christmas." That was to cheer up the hungry ones in Berlin. Everybody saw through it. The very stars laughed. It's done. God, Hallett, it's like clockwork. It's like a rehearsed and abominable program. Yes, a program. The wounded man lay quite still and gazed at the star. When he spoke, his words carried an odd sense of authenticity, finality. His mind had got a little away from him, and now it was working with the new oracular clarity of the moribund. It bothered the doctor inexplicably, tripped him up. He had to shake himself. He began to talk louder and make wide, scarcely visible gestures. "We've laughed so long, Hallett. There was Mittel Europa. We always laughed at that. A wag's tail. To think of it, a vast, self-sufficient, brutal empire laid down across the path of the world. Ha, 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 ha. Why, even if they had wanted it, it would be... If they wanted it, it would be inevitable." The doctor held up for a full dozen seconds. A kind of anger came over him, and his face grew red. He couldn't understand. He talked still louder. "But they're doing it. They're doing that same preposterous thing before our eyes, and we can't touch them, and they're... Hallett, they're damn near done. Behind that line there, you know the line I mean, who of us doesn't know it? That thin line of smoke and ashes and black blood, like a bent black wire over France. Behind that line, they're at work, day by day, month after month, building the empire we never believed. And Hallett, it's damn near done, and we can't stop it. It grows bigger and bigger, darker and darker. It covers up the sky, like a nightmare." "Like a dream," said Hallett softly. "A dream." The doctor's boot soles drummed with a dull, angry resonance on the deck. "And we can't touch them. They couldn't conceivably hold that line against us, against the whole world, long enough to build their incredible empire behind it. And they have. Hallett, how could they ever have held it?" "You mean, how could we ever have held it?" Hallett's words flowed on, smooth, clear-formed, unhurried, and his eyes kept staring at the star. "No, we have held it, not they. And we that have got to hold it, longer than they. Theirs is the kind of a Mittel Europa that's been done before. History is little more than a copybook for such an empire as they are building. We've got a vaster and more incredible empire to build than they, a Mittel Europa, let us say, of the spirit of man. No, no, Doctor, it's we that are doing the impossible, holding that thin line." The doctor failed to contain himself. "Oh, pshaw, pshaw. See here, Hallett, we've had the men, and there's no use blinking the truth, and we've had the money and the munitions. But back of all that, behind the last reserve, the last shell dump, the last treasury, haven't they got something that we've never had?" "And what's that?" "A dream." "A what?" "A dream. We've dreamed no dream. Yes, let me say it. A little while ago you said, 'nightmare,' and I said, 'dream.' Germany has dreamed a dream. Black as the pit of hell. Yes, yes, but a dream. They've seen a vision. A red, bloody, damned vision. Yes, yes, but a vision. They've got a program, even if it's what you called it, a rehearsed and abominable program. And they know what they want, and we don't know what we want." The doctor's fist came down in the palm of his hand. "What we want? I'll tell you what we want, Hallett. We want to win this war." "Yes? And by the living God, Hallett, we will win this war. I can see again. if we fight for half a century to come, if we turn the world wrong side out for men, young men, boys, babes, if we mine the earth to a hollow shell for coal and iron, if we wear our women to ghosts to get out the last grain of wheat from the fields, we'll do it. And we'll wipe this black thing from the face of the earth forever, root and branch, father and son of the bloody race of them to the end of time. If you want a dream, Hallett, there's a nightmare, an overweening muscular impulse to jump on the thing that scared us in the dark, to break it with our hands, grind it into the ground with our heels, tear ourselves away from it, and wake up. He went on again, after a moment of silence. Yes, that's it. We've never asked for anything better. Not once since those terrible August days have we got down on our naked knees and prayed for anything more than just to be allowed to wake up and find it isn't so. How can we expect, with a desire like that, to stand against a positive and a flaming desire? No, no. The only thing to beat a dream is a dream more poignant. The only thing to beat a vision black as midnight is a vision white as the noonday sun. We've come to the place, Doctor, where half a loaf is worse than no bread. The doctor put his hands in his pockets and took them out again, shifted away a few steps and back again. He felt inarticulate, handless, helpless in the face of things, of abstractions, of the mysterious, unflagging swiftness of the ship bearing him willy-nilly over the blind surface of the sea. He shook himself. "God help us," he said. "What God?" The doctor lifted a weary hand. "Oh, if you're going into that—" "Why not?" "Because Prussia, Doctor, has a God. Prussia has a God as terrible as the God of conquering Israel, a God created in her own image. We laugh when we hear her speaking intimately and surely to this God. I tell you we're fools. I tell you, Doctor, before we shall stand, we shall have to create a God in our own image. And before we do that, we shall have to have a living and sufficient image." "You don't think much of us," the doctor murmured wearily. The other seemed not to hear. After a little while he said, "We've got to say black or white at last. We've got to answer a question this time with a whole answer. This war began so long ago," he went on, staring at the star. "So long before Sarajevo, so long before the balances of power were thought of, so long before the provinces were lost and won, before Bismarck and the lot of them were begotten, or their fathers. So many, many years of questions put, and half-answers given in return. Questions, questions of a power loom in the North Counties, questions of a mill hand's lodging in one Manchester or another, of the weight of a head tax in India, of a widow's mass for her dead in Spain, questions of a black man in the Congo, of an eighth black man in New Orleans, of a Christian in Turkey, an Irishman in Dublin, a Jew in Moscow, a French cripple in the streets of Zabun, questions of an idiot sitting on a throne, questions of a girl asking her vote on a Hyde Park rostrum, of a girl asking her price in the dark of a Chicago doorway, whole questions half-answered, hungry questions half-fed, mutilated fag-ends of questions piling up and piling up, year by year, decade after decade. Listen. There came a time when it wouldn't do at all. There came a time when the sun of all those questions stood up in the world, final, unequivocal, naked, devouring, saying, 'Now you shall answer me. You shall look me squarely in the face at last, and you shall look at nothing else. You shall take your hands out of your pockets and your tongues out of your cheeks, and no matter how long, no matter what the blood and anguish of it, you shall answer me now with a whole answer, or perish.'" "And what's the answer?" The doctor leaned down a little, resting his hands on the foot of the cot. The grey patch of Hallett's face moved slightly in the dark. "It will sound funny to you, because it's a word that's been worn pretty thin by so much careless handling. It's democracy." The doctor stood up straight on his thick legs. "Why should it sound funny?" he demanded, a vein of triumph in his tone. "It is the answer, and we've given it. Make the world safe for democracy." "Eh? You remember the quotation? Yes, yes, that's good. But we've got to do more than say it, Doctor. Go further. We've got to dream it in a dream. We've got to see democracy as a wild, consuming vision. If the day ever comes when we shall pronounce the word democracy with the same fierce faith with which we conceive them to be pronouncing autocracy, that day, Doctor, he raised a transparent hand and moved it slowly over his eyes. It will be something to do, Doctor, that will, like taking hold of lightning. It will rack us body and soul. Belief will strip us naked for a moment, leave us newborn and shaken and weak as Christ in the manger. And that day nothing can stand before us, because you see, we'll know what we want. The doctor stood for a moment as he had been, a large, dark, troubled body, rocking slowly to the heave of the deck beneath him. He rubbed a hand over his face. "Utopian," he said. "Utopian," Hallett repeated after him. "Today we are children of Utopia, or we are nothing. I tell you, Doctor, today it has come down to this, Hamburg to Baghdad, or Utopia." The other lifted his big arms, and his face was red. "You're playing with words, Hallett. You do nothing but twist my words. When I say utopian, I mean precisely impossible. Absolutely impossible. See here. You tell me this empire of theirs is a dream. I give you that. How long has it taken them to dream it? 40 years. 40 years. And this wild, transcendental empire of the spirit you talk about, so much harder, so many hundreds of times more incredible, will you have us do that sort of a thing in a day? We're a dozen races, a score of nations. I tell you, it's impossible." "Yes, impossible." The silence came down between them, heavy with all the dark, impersonal sounds of passage, the rhythmical explosions of the waves, the breathing of engines, the muffled staccato of the spark in the wireless room, the note of the ship's bell forward striking the hour, and after it, a hail running thin in the wind. "6 bells, sir, and all's well. All's well." The irony of it. The infernal patness of it, falling so in the black interlude, like stage business long rehearsed. "All's well," the doctor echoed with the mirthless laughter of the damned. Hallett raised himself very slowly on an elbow and stared at the star beyond the rail. "Yes, I shouldn't wonder. Just now, tonight, somehow, I've got a queer feeling that maybe it is. Maybe it's going to be, who knows? The darkest hour of our lives, of history, perhaps, has been on us, and maybe it's almost over. Maybe we're going to do the impossible after all, Doctor, and maybe we're going to get it done in time. I've got a queer sense of something happening, something getting ready." When he spoke again, his voice had changed a little. "I wish my father could have lived to see this day. He's in New York now, and I should like—" The doctor moved forward suddenly and quietly, saying, "Lie down, Hallett. You'd better lie down now." But the other protested with a grey hand. "No, no, you don't understand. When I say, well, it's just the shell of my father walking around and talking around these 10 years past. Prison killed his heart. He doesn't even know it, that the immortal soul of him has gone out. You know him, Doctor, Ben Hallett, the radical, the destroyer, they used to call him in the old days. He was a brave man, Doctor. You've got to give him that. As brave as John the Baptist, and as mad. I can see him now, tonight, sitting in the back room in 8th Street, he and old Radinov and Hirsch and O'Reilly and the rest, with all the doors shut and the windows shut, and their eyes and ears and minds shut up tight, trying to keep the war out. They're old men, Doctor, and they must cling to yesterday and to tomorrow. They mustn't see today. They must ignore today. Today is the tragic interruption. They too ask nothing but to wake up and find it isn't so. All their lives they've been straining forward to see the ineffable dawn of the day of man, calling for the commune and the red barricades of revolution. The barricades. Yesterday, it seems to them now, they were almost in sight of the splendid dawn. The dawn of the day of barricades. And then this war, this thing they call a rich man's plot to confound them, hold them up, turn to ashes all the fire of their lives. All they can do is sit in a closed room with their eyes shut and wait till this meaningless brawl is done. And then tomorrow, some safely distant tomorrow for their old men, tomorrow the barricades. And that's queer. That's queer. Queer? It seems to me that for days now, for weeks and months now, there's been no sound to be heard in all the length and breadth of the world, but the sound of barricades. The voice trailed off into nothing. To the doctor, charging slowly back and forth along the near deck, his hands locked behind him and his face bent slightly over his breast, there came a queer sense of separation. From Hallett, from himself, his own everyday acts, his own familiar aspirations, from the ship which held him up in the dark void between two continents. What was it all about, he asked himself over and over. Each time he passed the shadow in the companionway, he turned his head, painfully and as if against his will. Once he stopped squarely at the foot of the cot and stood staring down at the figure there, faintly outlined, motionless and mute. Sweat stood for a moment on his brow and was gone in the steady onrush of the wind. And he was used to death. But Hallett had fooled him. He heard Hallett's whisper creeping to him out of the shadow. "That's a bright star, Doctor." The Bird of Serbia. By Julian Street, from Collier's Weekly, copyright 1918 by P.F. Collier and Son, Inc., copyright 1919, by Julian Street. "Here's a queer item," remarked the man at the window end of the long, leather-covered seat, looking up from his newspaper and apparently speaking in general to the other occupants of the Pullman's smoking compartment. "There's a dispatch here announcing the death from tuberculosis of that Serbian who shot the Archduke of Austria at Sarajevo. It seems he has been in prison ever since. I thought he had been executed long ago." 4 of us, strangers to one another, had settled in the smoking compartment at the beginning of the journey from Chicago to New York, and as we had been on our way nearly an hour, it seemed time for conversation. "They didn't execute him," replied a man who sat in one of the chairs, "because he was underage. It's against the law over there to execute a person under 21. This boy was only 19. "The law wouldn't have cut much figure over here in a case like that," replied the first speaker. "Perhaps not," returned the man in the chair, "but respect for law is one of the few benefits that seem to go with autocratic government. I don't find that dispatch in my paper. May I borrow yours?" The other handed over the journal, indicating the item with his finger. "I had almost forgotten that fellow," spoke up a third traveller. "The rush and magnitude of the war have carried our thoughts, and for the matter of that, our soldiers too, a pretty long way since the assassination occurred. Yet I suppose historians, digging back into the minute beginnings of the war, will all trace down to the shot fired by that Serbian." "That's what the paper says," returned the one who had begun to talk. "It speaks of the historic shot fired in Serbia as the thing that fired the world." "And in doing so," declared the man who had borrowed the paper, "it falls into a popular error. The shot was not fired in Serbia, but in Austria-Hungary, and the boy who did the shooting was an Austro-Hungarian subject." "But that doesn't seem possible," interposed the man who had spoken of the historical aspect of the case. "If he was an Austrian subject and did the shooting in Austria, how could Austria make that an excuse for attacking Serbia?" The other looked from the window for a moment before replying. "It was one of the poorest excuses imaginable," he returned. "Autocracies can do those things. That's why they must be stamped out. As you said, historians will trace back to the assassination. It so happened that I was over there at the time and got a glimpse of what lay back of the assassination. Microscopic, unclean forces of which historians will never hear, yet which seem peculiarly suitable in connection with Austria's crime. But I had better not get to talking about all that." As though in indication of his intention to be silent, he closed his mouth firmly. It was a strong mouth and could shut with finality. Everything about him expressed strength and determination mixed, as these qualities often are in the highest type of American businessman, with gentleness, good nature, and modesty. I liked his looks. He was the kind of man you would pick out to take care of your watch and pocketbook, or your wife, in case of emergency. I wanted him to go on talking and said so, and when both the other men backed up my request, he began in a spirit evidently reluctant but obliging. For some years before the outbreak of this war, he said, I represented a large American oil company in southeastern Europe, where we had a considerable market. My headquarters were at Vienna, but my travels took me through various countries inhabited by people of the Serb race, and I found it advantageous to learn to speak the Serbian tongue, both for business reasons and because I enjoyed making friends among the people. In order to practice the language and form some knowledge of the people, I made it a custom, when traveling, to stop at small hotels used by the Serbs themselves, in preference to the more cosmopolitan establishments, or, where the small hotels were not clean, I would sometimes take a room with some Serbian family. In Bosnia, there was one very attractive little city to which I was always particularly glad to go. It was a place of 30 or 40,000 inhabitants and lay in a lovely, fertile valley among the hills, and you may judge something of it by the fact that the Serbs coupled the adjective golden with the town's name. Not one American in 1,000, probably not one in 100,000, had ever heard of the place then, yet it was the capital of Bosnia. The Austrian governor of Bosnia had his palace there, and the life of the place was like that of some great capital in miniature. One thing about the town which interested me was the way in which its people and its architecture reflected Bosnian history. In the first place, there were many Serbs there, the more prosperous of them dressing like conventional Europeans, except that the fez was worn by almost all of them, and living in low, picturesque Serbian houses, with roofs of tile or flat stone shingle. The rest peasants in the Bosnian costume, who came in from the outlying agricultural regions. But also there were Mohammedans, leftovers from the days of Turkish dominion, and the town had minarets and other architectural signs of the Turk. And last, there were the Austrians, the Austrian governor, Austrian soldiers in uniform about the streets, Austrian minor officials everywhere, and in new buildings, parks and boulevards, Austrian taste. For after taking Bosnia under the Treaty of Berlin in 1878, the Austrians, knowing well that their grabbing policy was criticized, went to some pains to beautify the Bosnian capital, with the object, it is commonly understood, of impressing visitors, and perhaps also the inhabitants themselves, with the benefits of Austrian rule, as though palaces, parks, pavements, and prostitutes were sufficient compensation to the Serbs for the racial unity and freedom which have been denied them, first by one nation, then by another. But, someone broke in, up to the time of the present war, didn't the Serbs have Serbia? The present kingdom of Serbia proper was inhabited by Serbs, returned the other. But the Serbia we know is only a small part of what was, long ago, the Serbian Empire. Since the fall of the empire, in the 14th century, it has been the great ambition of the Serbs to become again a unified nation. Bosnia was a part of the old empire, but was conquered by the Turks and later taken over by the Austrians. The story I'm about to tell shows, however, what an enduring race consciousness the Bosnian Serbs have maintained. Our district manager for Bosnia lived in the town of which I have been speaking, and when I first went there, he took me to a small but particularly clean and attractive hotel run by an Austrian Serb. As is usual in small hotels in Europe, the proprietor's family took part in the work of running the place, and as I used to stay there frequently, sometimes for 2 or 3 weeks at a stretch, I soon came to know them all well. As the years passed, I became really attached to them, and there were many signs to show that they were fond of me. Michael, the father, exercised general supervision, though he was not above carrying a trunk upstairs. Stana, the mother, kept the accounts and superintended the cooking, which was excellent. The two daughters worked in the kitchen and sometimes helped wait on table. Even the boy, Gavrilo, the youngest member of the family, helped after school with light work, though he studied hard and was not very strong. I often sat with them at their own family table at one end of the dining room. I called them all by their given names and addressed them with the these and thou of familiarity. When I first knew Gavrilo, he was 12 or 13 years old. His father, though of pure Serb blood, had acquired, with years and experience in business, a certain resignation to the existing order of things. He had seen several wars and revolutions, and as he grew older, had begun to think that peace under Austrian domination was better than continual conflict, whatever the cause. The boy Gavrilo was, however, more like Stana, his mother. Stana could grow old, but the flame in her, the poetry, the mysticism, and above all the Serbian racial feeling, never diminished. Gavrilo learned the Serbian folk stories and songs at her knee. Also, he learned from her Serbian history, which, under Austria, was not taught in the schools, for the Austrians have long desired to crush out Serbian racial feeling. Gavrilo and I became great friends. He was hungry for knowledge and never tired of asking me about the United States and our freedom, free speech, and free opportunity, all of which, of course, seemed very wonderful to one growing up in a decadent bureaucratic empire, made up of various races held together against their will. In return, I gathered from Gavrilo a considerable knowledge of Serb history and legend, and you may be sure that in what he told me, neither the Turks nor the Austrians came off very well. Even as a lad, he always referred to the Austrians as Schwabe, a Serbian word meaning something like our term Bosch, and by the time he was 16, he had promoted them to be Proklet Schwabe, which may be freely translated as damned Bosch. For a long time I took his strong anti-Austrian utterances lightly, considering them the result of boyish ebullience of spirit, but as he grew nearer manhood, and the fierceness of his feelings seemed to increase rather than diminish, I became concerned about him. For it is no wiser for an Austrian Serb to call the Austrians Schwabe than it would be for an Alsatian to call the Prussians Boches. As Gavrilo grew up, his passionate racial feeling disturbed me more and more, though. Of course, I sympathized with it. I determined to make an opportunity for a serious talk with him on the subject, and to that end suggested that he go with me to the neighboring hills for a couple of days gunning, for Bosnia abounds in game. Gavrilo proved to be a very good shot. He would shoot wild pigeons, grouse, and woodcock from the hip, and he even brought along a pistol with which he could hit a hare at a considerable distance. These exhibitions of skill were, however, accompanied by remarks which did not make it easier for me to broach the topic upon which I wished to speak to him. When he would hit a pigeon, he would exclaim, "There goes another member of the Habsburg family," or "That one was a Schwab tax collector," or mock heroically, "So much for you, you nobleman of brilliant plumage with a von before your name. No more will the peasants step out of the road and bow down before you." "Look here, Gavrilo," I said, when we sat to rest upon a fallen tree. "You are a Serb, and that is something to be proud of. But after all, you are an Austrian subject, and your forefathers have been Austrian subjects for a long time. You have your home here, so why not make the best of a bad bargain and be like the rest of the young fellows?" "You think I am not like them," he replied. "That is only because you do not know them as you know me. Every Momchi who is a worthy descendant of the race that fought to the death at Kosovo, the field of the Black Bird, is of the Komitagia. We younger fellows are to be Komitagia also. We have our meetings in the same kafana, where the others meet to make their plans. When we are a little older, They will take us in, and we shall all work together. But what is this work you speak of? Whatever it is, he returned. You may be sure it is in the interest of our race. But you speak of comitagia, I said. Has not that word more than one significance? I know the military scouts with bombs are comitagia, but are not revolutionists called by the same term. Gavrilo showed his strong white teeth in one of those extraordinary mischievous smiles which now and then illuminated his face. Instead of giving me a direct answer, he said, Dear friend, I am glad to perceive that your knowledge of our beloved Serbian tongue becomes daily more accurate. But Gavrilo, I protested, refusing to be put off with a jest, to be concerned in a revolution would be the worst thing that could happen to you. No, not the worst thing. Worse than being a Serb and joining in a revolution would be to be a Serb and fail to lift a hand in the struggle for freedom. Revolutions, I said sententiously, do not pay, Gavrilo. But since when has that been so? He countered quickly. There was, for instance, the French Revolution. Did not that pay? And there was the American Revolution. Surely that paid. And there was the revolution of Serbia against the Turks. That is paying too. His luminous black eyes, so like those of a wild deer, snapped as he spoke. Then his expression changed quickly to one of amusement over my discomfiture, and he added with a little laugh, I have an American friend, a gentleman who manages the business of a large oil company over here. He can tell you, as he has me, of the benefits of the American Revolution and of American freedom. I promise you that some day you shall meet him face to face, let us say tomorrow morning when he is shaving. It seemed to me that I had taken an unfortunate line with him there, so I tried another. Well then, let us put it on selfish grounds. There is no great reason why you personally should be dissatisfied. You have good prospects in your father's business. The thing for you to do in the natural course is to marry and settle down. And certainly a man who has a sweetheart such as yours hasn't any business in a comitagia, for such things lead to prisons and executions, not to domesticity. What makes you think I have a sweetheart? He demanded, flushing. Haven't I seen Mara? Well, what of it? If you can resist Mara, I told him, you have more strength than I would give you credit for. And it was quite true, for Mara, who lived next door to the hotel, was a beautiful young thing, and they were much together. Mara is a flirt, said he. What matter, I returned, so long as she flirts most with you. But does she like me best? He mused. There is this fellow in the government railways who comes as often as he can to see her. He has the advantage of being a connection by marriage and is very handsome, really too handsome for a man. I am glad he does not live here all the time. You have the advantage of living next door, I encouraged. The one thing that might interfere is this idea of yours about being one of the comitagia. Still, he protested, shaking his head doubtfully, a man's first duty is not to the woman he loves, but to the race he loves, because both she and he belong to it. You know our old song? And he sang there in the woods. Do show, my soul, I love thee second best. Thou art the dearest part of Serbia to me, but after all thou art but a part, even as I am a part, and it is Serbia, always Serbia, that together we love most. Though not altogether satisfied with our conversation, I felt that in appealing to the boy's love for Mara, I had struck the right note, and I hoped that as time went on, he would think more about her than about the comitagia. For, though one may be heartily in sympathy with revolutionary ideas, especially in the case of an oppressed race, one does not like to see a youth of whom one is really fond, heading toward disaster, even in such a cause. Moreover, as I have said, Gavrilo was not as solidly built as the average Serb, and I had the feeling that the burning spirit in him, and I assure you it was more like a living flame than anything I have seen in the nature of man or woman, must either be kept under control or else destroy his body. Consequently, I was much relieved to see, as I returned from time to time, that the boy and girl romance between Gavrilo and Mara was naturally and charmingly developing into something more mature. This led me to hope the more that as he turned from a youth into a man, Gavrilo would shed some of the violence of his revolutionary aspirations, and from the indications I judged that such a thing was indeed coming to pass. In order more fully to reassure myself, I more than once took occasion to lead conversations with him into such channels that, should he desire to do so, he could speak to me of the comitagia. But he always let the openings pass, seeming eager now to speak only of the lovely Mara. When in the summer of 1913 I arrived for one of my periodical visits, Gavrilo came rushing to my room and, seizing both my hands, told me that he and Mara were now betrothed. He was then 18, and she 17, for you understand, of course, that these dark South Europeans develop younger than our people do. Both families were pleased, and I felt that the dangers I had feared for Gavrilo were past, and was duly thankful. I went out and bought a necklace for Mara, and when I gave it to her, she and Gavrilo made me clasp it around her neck, and he said to her very seriously, "Yes, and our dear friend shall be the godfather of our first child. Is it not so, Maroducho?" And Mara, taking me by the hand, told me it was quite true, and that she was going to love me as much as Gavrilo loved me, and that, moreover, they were going to have hundreds of children, and that every one of the children should love me too. It was all indescribably naive and pretty until Gavrilo unfortunately added, "Yes, our children will love you, and they will love us, but most of all, they will love the idea of a free Serb race." At that, a cloud passed over Mara's face. "Oh, Gavrilo," she cried impatiently, "shall we never hear of anything but the Serb race? Is there nothing else in the world? Must that come before your thought of your friend here," indicating me, "before your thought of me, of the children we hope to have, of everything? Must you have Serbian freedom on your bread in place of cheese, and in your glass in place of wine? Sometimes I think your eyes shine more brightly when you speak of our race than when you call me Dusho. My soul. I ask myself, is it indeed the soul of Mara that he loves, or is it the soul of the race?" "Mara, my dear child," I put in, "I believe you are jealous." "Of whom, pray?" she demanded, turning upon me and flinging her head back proudly. "Not of an individual," I answered, "but of a people." "Perhaps it is true," she returned with a shrug. "Well, what of it?" "Only this, that a woman with nothing more concrete than a whole race to be jealous of is in no very sad plight." "But I tell you I demand to be loved for myself," Mara flashed back. Gavrilo sighed deeply, as though at the hopelessness of making her understand his point of view. Then, mournfully, he hummed, "Thou art the dearest part of Serbia to me, but after all thou art but a part, even as I am a part. And it is Serbia, always Serbia." But Mara would not let him finish. "Enough!" she cried. "I detest that song. You know how I detest it." Gavrilo looked at me and shook his head. "Oh, these women!" he exclaimed. "What they do to one!" Then, gazing reflectively at Mara, he added in the tone of one attempting to be philosophical, "Well, when a little female looks as angelic as my Mara, naturally we expect her to think like an angel too." At this Mara's anger departed as quickly as it had come. "There!" she exclaimed, flinging her arms about his neck and kissing him upon both cheeks. "There spoke my own dear Gavrilo. Poor Gavrilo, what have I been saying? You know I love the Serbs no less than you do. You do know it, don't you? Well then, say so." "God forbid that I should believe otherwise," answered Gavrilo, kissing her in return. As I left them, I thought to myself that with Mara's temperament, to say nothing of the hundreds of children she promised him, Gavrilo's married life would not prove monotonous, whatever else it might be. When in the course of the subsequent fall and winter I saw them again, they seemed as happy as a pair of wild birds. Once, in the spring, when I was with them, the comitagia chanced in some way to be mentioned, whereupon Mara at once darkened, saying to me, "That is my one sorrow." "But why should it be?" Gavrilo asked her. "Have I not plighted you my word that I shall not take part in in any indiscretions that may be proposed?" "Yes, I have not forgotten. You said that as long as I loved you, you would be my good Gavrilo." "So," he returned gaily, "all you need do is to continue to adore me as I deserve." "But you meet with them at the kafana," she said uneasily. "They are my friends," he answered. "Naturally, then, I meet with them. All men meet at the kafana. It is the way of men. A little wine or coffee or prune brandy and a little talk, that is all. I go also to church, but that does not make me a priest. And besides, dearest Maro, if I were not sometimes with the Momchidia, how would I know the joy of returning to you?" "If the devil had your tongue," laughed Mara, "he could talk all the saints out of heaven." So it always was with Mara. Her ideas came and went, as Gavrilo once put it to me, like hummingbirds flitting in and out amongst the flowers. Never have I seen a human being turn from gay to grave and back again as rapidly as she. Arriving at the little hotel in the early part of June, 1914, I found them all full of plans for a great fete to be celebrated on Vidovdan, Kosovo Day, June 28. This day might be called the Serbian 4th of July, but it partakes also of the character of our Memorial Day, for it is the anniversary of that tragic event in Serbian history, the Battle of Kosovo, in which the Turks defeated the Serbs in 1389, leaving the entire Serbian nobility dead upon the field. That is one reason why Serbia has no nobles today. Kosovo means the field of the black bird, the Koz being a black songbird resembling the starling. But this was to be no ordinary celebration of the holiday, for in the Balkan War of the 2 preceding years, Serbia had consummated her independence and humbled the Turks, and a part of the Serbian racial dream was thereby realized. Mara, Gavrilo, and their parents united in urging me to return for the festival, and before departing, I agreed to do so. True to my word, I arrived several days ahead of time. Gavrilo had not returned from the academy when I reached the hotel, but Michael and Stana gave me a warm welcome and produced the costumes they were intending to wear, and I remember that Stana said I ought to have a costume too, that even though I had not been so fortunate as to be born a Serb, they proposed to adopt me. "But you should see Mara's costume," she exclaimed, when I admired hers. "It is a true Serbian dress, very old, which came to her from her great-grandmother. Such beautiful embroidery you never saw." That made a good excuse for me to go and see Mara, whom I found sewing in the little garden behind the house. The costume, which she showed me, was indeed beautiful, and I admired it in terms which were, I hope, sufficiently extravagant to please even a girl as exacting as she. While talking with her, I observed a bird cage hanging on a hook by the window, and never having noticed it before, asked if she had a new bird. In reply, she merely nodded, without looking up from her work. I strolled over and looked at the bird. "Why," I said, "this bird appears to be a Koz Maro." Probably there was a note of surprise in my voice, for the Koz is not supposed to live in captivity. Mara looked up sharply. "Are you visiting blame upon me, then?" she asked. "Not at all," I answered, mystified at her tone. "I did not know that the Koz could be tamed. That is all." "Did Gavrilo tell you to speak to me about this?" she demanded. "Certainly not," I answered. "I have not seen Gavrilo yet." Then, crossing to where she sat and looking down at her, I asked, "What is the matter, Maro? How have I offended you?" Her eyes filled with tears as she looked up at me. "You have not offended me, dear friend," she said. It is only that I am made miserable by this subject. My relative who is employed in the railway caught this bird a few days since, placed it in a cage, and presented it to me. And if he is a handsome young fellow, am I to be censured for that? I am not his mother, nor yet his father. I did not make him handsome. And even so, what is a little bird to make words and black looks over? You mean that Gavrilo is annoyed? Since this bird came, she returned, I have heard of nothing else. He begs me to let it go. He insists that it will die. He says the man who gave it me is cruel and that I am cruel too. Then why not release it? I suggested. It is dying in the cage, Maro. Let it die then, she cried, and burst into a flood of tears. Now, Maro, I urged when the paroxysm had abated. What is all this about? Well, she gulped, wiping her eyes. A girl must have a little character, must she not? She must make up her own mind occasionally about some little thing. Is not that true? Is the man she loves to tell her when to draw in her breath and when to let it go again? Is he to tell her when to wink her eyes? Is she to cease to think and do only as he thinks? Here came this young man, with the miserable bird. I desired it not. Then came Gavrilo, black and angry like a storm out of the mountains, ordering me to let the bird go. I wished to do as Gavrilo said, but as my relative had caught it and given it to me, I felt I should first speak to him. Besides, he is older and knows a great deal, being in the government railroads. And what did he say? Maro, he said, you do as you wish. If you wish to be a little fool, humor this boy. He is spoiled. He has everything as he desires it. They say you are to marry him. Very well. But if you think always with his mind, and hold no ideas of your own, I tell you you will make a wife no better than one of those stupid Turkish women. That is why I determined to retain the bird. There is a cause in every second tree. Well then, is it not better that this one die than that my soul shall wither? Why should I be called Mara if I shall no longer be a separate being, but only Gavrilo in another body? As she finished, we heard Gavrilo calling her name from the street, and a moment later, he came in through the garden gate. I saw at once that he was agitated. So you have come, he cried, seizing my hands. But alas, my friend, it is in vain. You have heard the evil tidings. You mean about... I had almost said about the bird, but fortunately he interrupted, exclaiming, Yes, about the festival. What tidings? Demanded Mara. Gavrilo threw his arms above his head in a gesture of helpless fury. Those Proklet Schwaber, he burst out. They issued an edict only an hour ago, forbidding entirely our festival of Vidov Dan. No! Cried Mara, dismayed, half rising from her seat. Yes, there shall be no celebration, not for the Serbs, nothing. Attempts to commemorate the anniversary will result in arrest. It is announced that in place of our festival, there will upon that day be extensive maneuvers of the Austrian army, and that grand headquarters will be here in our city. We are given to understand that the Archduke himself will come and hold the review. Could anything be devised more to insult us upon our national holiday? Oh, of what vile tricks are not these accursed Schwaber capable? I am surprised, I said, that the Archduke would be party to a thing of this kind, for it is understood that he is pro-Serb. Certainly his wife is a Slav. The more shame to her, then, for marrying him, said Gavrilo with a shrug. He is the spawn of an autocrat who is in turn the spawn of generations of autocrats. Scratch them and they are all the same. They play the game of empire, the dirty game of holding together, against their will, the people of 7 races in Austria-Hungary, grinding them down, humiliating them, keeping them afraid. No man, no group of men should have such power. It is medieval, grotesque, wicked. More than that, put in Mara. It is unwise. They take a poor way to gain favor with us Serbs. For my part, I do not think it safe for the Archduke to come here." "And there, my Mila," he declared, with a shrewd, sinister smile, "your judgment is perhaps better than even you yourself suppose. Myself, I doubt he will be fool enough to come. At the last, we shall be informed with a grand flourish that he is indisposed. Not sick, you understand. Royalties are never sick. It is not etiquette. Peasants are sick. The middle classes are ill. The greater only indisposed. Anything else is vulgar. Well, I hope he will know enough to stay away. Otherwise, he may indeed become indisposed after his arrival." "What do you mean, Gavrilo?" I asked. "That the air of this place is not good for Austrian royalties just now," he said. "It is Serbian air. There are the germs of freedom in it, and such germs are more dangerous to autocrats than those of cougar, cholera." "Be frank," I urged. "Do you mean that the Archduke's life is threatened?" "It is known," he replied, "that the governor has received warning letters. The Archduke is advised not to appear here on our holiday. One understands, moreover, that the Austrian secret police concur in this advice, which shows that the filthy beasts are not so stupid as they might be." "Assure me, Gavrilo," Mara broke in, "that your comitadja has naught to do with this threat." "Long ago," he answered, "I promised you that while you love me, I will not actively participate in anything violent. You may be sure, Maromila, that I shall keep my word." "You keep your word always," she replied, "but these threats disturb me, and I gain comfort from your reassurances." Gavrilo walked slowly over and looked into the birdcage. "You are certain, then, that you do requite my affection?" he asked her over his shoulder. "You are well aware," she said, "that I worship you." "Would that I were as well aware of it," he returned, "as that I am nothing to be worshipped." Then, after a pause, he added, "If you do love me, why not release this poor bird? See how wretchedly it huddles. Its eyes are becoming dull. It will surely die. How can we Serbs talk of freedom for ourselves, yet hold this wild creature prisoner? And of all birds, a kos, the bird of Kosovo. Permit me to open the door of the cage, Maro. Let us celebrate the Serbian holiday by liberating the poor kos. Schwabe cannot prevent that, with all their edicts." Mara looked black. "The holiday is not yet here," said she. "When the day comes," he answered, "the cows will be dead." "I wish it were already dead," she exclaimed petulantly. "I wish I had never seen the accursed thing. It has brought me only sorrow." "Then," I interjected, "why not let it fly away?" "I have told you both," she answered angrily. "This means more to me than the life or death of a bird. It is a symbol. I have the feeling that if it were to fly away, all my will power would fly with it." "And to me also," returned the boy solemnly. "This means more than the life or death of a bird. And likewise to me the cause is a symbol. It should be so to every Serb. Think of Kosovo. This is a bird linked with our racial aspirations. If we free this one, we may perhaps ourselves deserve freedom. Otherwise, what do we deserve? Do we merit more than we ourselves give?" Having witnessed Mara's agitation, when she first told me of their differences over the bird, I would now have stopped Gavrilo, could I have signaled him, but he was engaged in putting some green leaves through the door of the cage. As he finished speaking, Mara rose, dropped her sewing upon the ground, and bursting into tears ran into the house. "Maro Mila!" Gavrilo cried, attempting to catch her, but the door slammed in his face. He was white as he turned to me. "Tell me," he cried, in a tone childlike and baffled, "can anyone understand the ways of woman? As men grow older, do they understand better? Or is it always like this?" Deeply concerned about them as I was, the naivete of this question forced a smile from me. You must ask some man older than I answered. Perhaps we are not intended to understand them, he said reflectively. No doubt the Lord made them as they are so that we should forever be enthralled by them as by any other enigma beyond comprehension. I enjoy lying on my back at night to gaze up at the stars and think profoundly of eternity whirling about us and the infinity of space, but I assure you, when my lovely Mara becomes agitated, those phenomena of nature seem, by contrast, trifling matters. I believe that if one could but understand Mara, one could understand the riddles of the ages. I left Gavrilo in the garden. At dinner that night, he was not with us. I did not see him again until next evening, when I came upon him whispering with 3 young men upon the stairs. As I passed them, they became silent, nor did I like the nervous smile with which Gavrilo greeted me. On the day following, I saw him go into a kafana with the same youths. I think he also saw me, and from the haste with which he moved into the little cafe, I gathered the impression that he was avoiding me. On the day before the maneuvers, I cornered him after luncheon. Clearly, he was keyed to a highly nervous tension. Gavrilo, I said, do not tell me anything you do not wish to. I have no desire to pry into your affairs, but I beg you to remember Mara and your promise to her, and not to become entangled in any rash escapade. For a moment he stood looking at me without answering. It was as though he was carefully formulating a reply. Then he said, I have remembered. I have positively refused to participate in certain matters in which I have been pressed to become active. At this moment, that is all that I am enabled to say. It is all I desire to know, I said. Tell me, what of Mara? All is well between us, he returned, so long as one mentions not the bird. Later I found them together in the garden. Mara was, as usual, sewing. While I sat and talked with her, Gavrilo started picking fresh leaves to put into the birdcage. Mara, who had been telling me how, upon the morrow, the Serbs were to leave their shutters closed all day, so that they should not see the Austrians, ceased to speak as Gavrilo began gathering the leaves, and watched him narrowly for a moment. Gavrilo, she said, please put no more leaves into the cage. Why not? Because it is not well for him. He has been pecking at the leaves, and I think they poison him. No, said Gavrilo. Yes, she insisted. He appears miserable today. But naturally, returned the youth. That is not new. He is dying. See how he is huddled with closed eyes in the corner of the cage. As he spoke, he plucked another leaf. Mara's expression became ominous. If he should die, she said in a quavering voice, it will be because of the leaves which you have given him. Impossible, Gavrilo replied. Does not a bird live among the leaves? I tell you, she exclaimed, I have asked the old birdman about it. He says some leaves are good and some are not. He is coming this evening to see the coos and give it medicine in its water. I was relieved when Gavrilo pressed the point no farther, but dropped the fresh leaves on the ground. Feeling that a situation had been narrowly averted, I thought best to leave them together. That evening, as I was walking toward the hotel from the square at the center of the town, I saw him coming out of the kafana with several of the youths I had come to recognize as his friends. He joined me, and we walked along together. At Mara's garden gate he halted, saying, Let us enter and see the poor bird. No, Gavrilo, I said warningly, it is not the bird we go to see, but Mara. So be it, he replied. Let us then visit Mara. Mara was not in the garden. Gavrilo called her name. She answered from the house, and a moment later came out to meet us. As she emerged, I saw her glance at the birdcage. Then she gave a startled cry. Look, she wailed. The coz is dead. It was true. There lay the bird upon its back among the dry leaves at the bottom of the cage. For a time we stood in silence, regarding it through the bars. I knew that Gavrilo and Mara were filled with emotion, and for my own part, I was surprised to discover how much the death of the bird seemed to mean to me. When, a day or two before, they had spoken of symbolism in connection with the cows, I knew what they meant, but did not feel it. Yet now I felt it strongly, as though I myself were a Serb, with a Serb's vision and superstition. It was not a dead bird that I saw, but a climax in a parable, a story of scriptural flavor, fraught with uncanny meaning. Gavrilo was the first to speak. "Poor cause," he said in a low, tragic tone. "It is free at last. It was written that it should not be captive when tomorrow dawns." "What do you mean?" demanded Mara. "I told you it was destined to die, unless you let it go," he answered gently. "And as I would not let it go," she retorted, "you desired that it should die in accordance with your prophecy." "Yes, that is it. You made it die. You placed the leaves of henbane in its cage and killed it." "You are excited, Maro," he returned. "You must know that I desired the poor bird to live. Let us dig a little grave here in the garden and bury it, and cease to speak of it until we are calmer. We are overwrought, both of us, because of the bitterness of tomorrow. Where is the spade?" "Do not touch the cows," she commanded. "It shall not be buried yet." "Why not?" I interposed. "It will be better for us all." "The old birdman comes this evening," Mara flung back. "He will look at the bird and know that Gavrilo has poisoned it with henbane." "But Maro," I returned, "Gavrilo has said that he did not. You know that he is truthful." "His words mean nothing," she cried. "Am I not a Serb? Do I not read the meanings in events? Gavrilo lies. Gavrilo killed the cows. He is a murderer. I hate him." "Ah!" he exclaimed. "You give me the truth at last." "Yes, the truth." "So much the better that I know in time," cried Gavrilo, and without another word he ran frantically from the garden. As for Mara, she seemed almost on the brink of madness. I do not know how long I remained there trying to reason with her, calm her, make her see the folly and danger of what she had done. By the time her passion had abated, the late June twilight had settled over the town. Presently I heard the garden gate open, and a moment later a venerable Serb appeared. "Wait," Mara said to me. "Now you shall learn that I was right." Then, to the old man, she said, "You are too late to cure my bird, but you are not too late to tell me from what cause came its death. Look at this leaf that was placed in its cage. Is not that the henbane?" The old man took the leaf, inspected it, and shook his head. "No," said he, "let me see the bird. It lies there in the cage." He opened the cage door and, reaching in, removed the little body. "Ah," he said, "of course. Do you not know, my child, that birds of this species cannot long survive captivity?" Mara hung her head. "I have heard it said," she answered in a low voice. "To imprison wild birds is cruel," remarked the old birdman. "These birds, in particular, are the Serbs of the air. They are descended from birds that saw the field of Kosovo. They desire only to be free." Then, as Mara did not reply, he said, "Bring a light." She went into the house and emerged with a lamp, placing it upon a table near the door. The old birdman sat down beside the table and, holding the bird near the light, brushed back the soft plumage of its breast, much in the manner of peasant mothers whom one sees, occasionally, searching with unpleasant suggestiveness in their children's hair. "Look," he said, "the bird would have died of these, even had it survived captivity. It is covered with animalculae. In a cage, it could not rid itself of them as nature enables free creatures to do." Looking at the bird's breast, Mara and I could see the deadly vermin. "Give me a spade," said the old man. "I will interr the bird here in the garden." Mara indicated a spade leaning against the wall. Then, turning with beseeching eyes to me, she seized both my hands and said in a low, intense voice, "Go, I pray you, and find Gavrilo. Tell him that I implore his forgiveness. Say that I love him better than all the world, and ask only that he come to me at once." I went directly to the hotel and to Gavrilo's room. He was not there. No one about the place had seen him. I then went to the kafana which I knew he patronized, but the proprietor declared that he knew nothing of his whereabouts. Through the remainder of the evening I diligently searched the town, going to the houses of all his friends, but nowhere could I find a trace of him. Obliged at last to acknowledge myself defeated, I returned to the hotel. Several times during the night I arose and stole to his room, but daylight came without his putting in an appearance. Early in the morning I went again to the kafana, but though I learned there that the Archduke had arrived the night before with his wife and his suite and was housed at the governor's palace, I got no word of the missing boy. Wherefore, after breakfast, it became my unpleasant duty to go to Mara, inform her of my failure, and comfort her as best I might. She looked ill and terrified. I wished that she would weep. Thinking perhaps to find him in the central square of the town before the Archduke, the governor, and the other officials set out for the review, I was moving in that direction when there came to my ears the dull sound of an explosion. Continuing on my way, I encountered as I rounded the next corner a scattering crowd of men, women, and children running toward me in the street. I asked 2 or 3 of them what had happened, but they ran on without reply. Presently, among them, I saw one of the youths with whom I had several times seen Gavrilo, and him I seized by the coat, demanding information. "Let me go!" he cried. "Someone threw a bomb into the Archduke's carriage. They are arresting everyone. Get away!" And he tugged violently to escape my hold. "Have you seen Gavrilo?" "Not today." "Is the Archduke dead?" "No. He warded off the bomb, and it exploded beneath the carriage which followed. For God's sake, release me." I did so and walked on toward the square. Halfway down the block I met some Austrian police. After questioning me briefly, they let me go, whereafter I questioned them. The horses drawing the second carriage had been killed, they said, and some officers of the Archducal suite injured. The Archduke, however, insisted upon continuing to the review and would presently pass. They advised me to return to my hotel. I had hardly reached my room when I heard a bugle and the clatter of hoofs outside. Going to the window, I saw mounted men of the Royal Austrian Guard advancing around the corner. Behind them, between double rows of cavalry, came several landaus, carrying outriders and driven by coachmen in white wigs and knee breeches. As the first of these vehicles came nearer, I saw that the occupants of the back seat were Francis Ferdinand, Archduke of Austria, heir apparent to the throne of Austria-Hungary, and his morganatic wife, the Duchess of Hohenberg. The shutters of most of the houses were closed, but in a few windows I saw faces, and there were scattered knots of people on the sidewalks, closely watched by the policemen who rode ahead on horses and bicycles. As the archducal carriage came along, hats were raised, and once or twice I heard faint cheering, which the Archduke and his consort acknowledged, he by touching the visor of his helmet, she by inclining her head. As their carriage came below my window, and I saw the expression of condescending goodwill frozen on both their faces, and thought of the constant apprehension there must be behind those polite masks, it struck me as amazing that a man and woman could be found, in these times, to play the royal part. As I was thinking thus, I saw a dark-clad figure dart out suddenly from somewhere on the sidewalk below, pass swiftly between the horses of the bodyguard, and reach the side of the royal carriage. Some of the guardsmen leaped at once from their horses, and there was a dash of policemen toward the man. But before anyone laid hands upon him, he raised one arm, as though pointing accusingly at the Archduke and his Countess, and there followed, in swift succession, 2 sharp reports. I saw the royal pair fall forward. Simultaneously, the carriage stopped and was at once surrounded by an agitated group of soldiers, policemen, and servants, while another and more violent group pressed about the individual who had fired the shots, beating him as they swept him away down the street. Before they had gone a dozen yards, however, a high official who had jumped out of the second carriage ran up and directed them to take the man to the sidewalk. This brought the crowd in my direction, and it was only as they turned toward me that I caught a glimpse of the face of their prisoner. As I had dreaded, it was poor Gavrilo. For a moment all of us were too thunderstruck to speak. Somehow the picture he had given us did not seem to be that of an assassin, as one imagines such a man. "You mean to say," asked the man by the window slowly, "that this very boy you've been telling us about was the one who shot the Archduke?" "Yes," said the other. "He was Gavrilo Princip of Sarajevo." "Good Lord!" exclaimed the third. "The boy who brought on the war?" "As we were saying earlier," returned the one who had told the tale, "historians will doubtless trace the beginnings of the war to Gavrilo's shot. Certainly Austria used the shot as her excuse, alleging that a plot to kill the Archduke had been hatched in Serbia, which was absolutely untrue, for Serbia was afraid of nothing so much as of giving offence to Austria, knowing well that Austria was only seeking a pretext to pounce upon her, precisely as she had earlier pounced upon Bosnia and Herzegovina, annexing them. After a thoughtful pause, he added, "Poor Gavrilo, I am glad to know that he is free at last. Like Mara's starling, he was not one to live long in a cage, and it is perhaps because I was so fond of him, and also because Austria's excuse was so transparently despicable, that I shall always go behind the shooting in thinking of the beginning of the war. As I conceive it, it was Mara's anger that released Gavrilo from the promise which otherwise would have withheld him, and it was the death of the caged starling that brought on her anger, and it was the animalculae that caused the bird's death. That is," put in the man by the window, "you prefer to trace the war down to such a small beginning as the death of that caged bird." "Rather," replied the other, "to a still smaller and more repulsive beginning, to the vermin which destroyed the bird. It seems to me I see them always crawling through the explanations, apologies, excuses, war messages, and peace overtures of the Teutonic autocrats.